Okay, so this lovely little session is about our kite plans and our kite teams. And it's a response to some of the data that I showed you earlier for some of you in our modified programming. So I like to call this kites and other delights. Look at those kites soaring. Those could be some of our kids sometimes. So here's what I'd like you to think about when you're thinking about our social emotional kids is that we have this pendulum. And on one side, we have the developmental approach, with many of you will know that's our Neufeld training that we've done. And on the other side, we have behavioral. And as a division, we kind of moved and swung all the way over to a very developmental approach. And what I would really challenge us is to think that we actually have two arms. We have a behavioral side and we have a developmental side, and we have relationship that sits in the middle and holds everything in place. So imagine as a teacher, there's going to be some times when you're going to move over to the developmental side to support relationship, connection, dysregulation. And there's other times when you actually move to the behavioral side, and that's okay. Behavioral is something that we use as teachers, and our students sometimes need that. Structure, routine. Every once in a while, a little reward chart doesn't hurt with the right things in place. So I just want us to think about that we have this whole landscape, that as teachers, we can move from behavioral all the way to developmental. A lot of times we sit in the middle and we have a combination of both. Either one in the extreme, I think, is dangerous. So being all the way over on behavioral, that means you're highly consequential. That could be dangerous. If you're all the way over on developmental, that means you're all the way onto that attachment side and following the need. And not all of our students require that support. They actually need some structure and routine. So we need to be able to know when we shift to what side and how much we do with each one of them. Super important. The kite plans that we started in the model came from this idea when we, as a student services team, and Denelda was a big part of this, we got together and thought about our behavior support plans and thought about our behavior and social emotional kids. And we wanted to come up with a new way of supporting them that we felt would provide us with more interventions and really map out the cycle of what we were seeing with our kids. So we call it a kite for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of the shape of it. But I don't want us to let go of and forget about these foundational elements. So when you think about a kite, there's always this sense of connection, right? You've got a string and it's connected. Your kite is connected to somebody that can guide the kite and make sure that it doesn't go near anything unsafe, like an electrical wire or hit a building. And that's the same with our kids. Like, that's why we have that idea of a kite, is that you've got connection. You're guiding and making sure that they're safe. There's space between yourself and the kite. So you don't just have your kite on this little tight string and it's right up against your hand. There's space there. And that's really important for our social emotional kids. They need space. They need to have some room, and we're not hovering over them, because if we do, sometimes we become the trigger for them. And then when things are going right, there's lots of opportunities for them to soar and be successful. So many of you have seen the kite. You've seen the kite plans. You've been working through them. What I really want to talk about today is not only just the kite itself, but kite teams and the roles of our EAs when they get up into acceleration and peak, because that's the place where I think we struggle sometimes. So we have two versions of this plan. We have one that gives you all of the definitions of each of the areas of the kite. And then we have another one that has universal strategies. So my lovely Mary will put both the definitions and the strategies in a kite shared drive for you at the end of the day, so you have them. So the universal strategies are great. Those should be your go-tos to start with. And then as you move up and become more specialized with your kids, you might need to make a more personalized plan. For example, here is a student that we've done a really intense plan for. Like, you can see the see and the do. We've done it at calm, worked through the triggers, moved into agitation, got all the way up to acceleration, what we do at peak. So this would be a really great idea or a snapshot of what you might see for one of your more complex kids. And this to me is a living document, you guys. So you're working through this, and our kids, they leave triggers and then they gain, unfortunately, new triggers. So when we get up to peak, as difficult as those moments are, they're also really important learning moments for us. What brought us up to peak? What do we need to go back into trigger and readjust? So what started that whole thing? Well, it was spiders. Well, we never knew that this kid didn't like spiders. Spider in the classroom, and that got us all the way up to the red, and we were there for almost the whole day. So it's really adjusting. So what were the triggers? What things did you do when you were at peak that calmed him down? So you could put that as a trigger strategy so you're not back up in peak when you do that. And in peak itself, I find that is the place where it is live wire. So anytime you're at peak and you get out of there and you're back down into calm, that's the time when you should be having a meeting with your EAs and your team at the end of the day to say, what happened? What did you do? How did we get that de-escalated? And then to remind ourselves what brought that up higher and what was able to bring us back down again. So these plans, like I've seen schools laminate them and they're just writing on them. I've seen them make them large and just put them in the room where the student is so at the end they can reflect on it. These are your living documents of what you're doing. And they replace our behavior support plan, because our behavior support plans that we had before were a lot about goals and strategies. These, I think, are much more detailed. This is like in the moment what we're doing to support our kids. And the goal always is, of course, to never get up to peak and to share the kite. So the bottom half of the kite really should be the teacher, and the top half of the kite should be the EA team. So when we're doing things well, the teacher is the one that is looking at the triggers, responding and supporting, and always important to be reconnecting and repairing the relationship. And the EAs are the ones that come in and support when we're moving up to acceleration. So I put a little circle by agitation, because that really should be the place where the teacher determines, I need the kite team, and initiates the kite team to come. When you look at this, look at this massive document and all of the things that are in it. Asking one person to do this all day, one EA to do this whole thing throughout the day, you understand then why our staff sometimes don't want to do this, burn out, or get hurt. It's too much for one person to do. We need to be able to work in teams around these kids for our own safety, for their safety, and I think for our own wellness. So I think this shows it really clearly that if you're asking one person, one-to-one all day to manage a student, I think you can see why that's probably an unrealistic ask when we have some other structures and processes in the division that we could do. I just want to go over again the lid flip, so that when you're working with your EAs and your teachers and your teams, you can remind them of this, because it's so easy to forget it, right? It's that upstairs brain and downstairs brain, and what we call the lid flip. So if you look, when things are going great, if you've got your hand and you put your fingers over top of your thumb, imagine that's your brain. All of your upstairs brain when we're at calm, these are all the things that you have ready at hand. You've got regulation of your body. You are in tune to communication. And look what it says, you're in touch with another person's feelings. So you understand empathy during that time. You've got emotional balance. You're not so rigid. You're not just so reactive. You can be more responsive. You're flexible. And then you have this insight, this self-knowing. So I always think upstairs brain, look at all of the things that are on there. And when your lid is flipped, when you're at peak, all of those things leave. So all of a sudden now you're not able to go back to baseline because you can't regulate your body. You're not able to connect. A lot of times students can't even hear. They're definitely not able to empathize with what you're asking. So an apology is not going to happen at that time. You don't have that emotional response. Instead, you're in that flight and fright response. not flexible. So you've seen that, like, no, I'm not moving. No, I don't want to do that. No, I hate you. No, don't ask, right? Just no ability to really think about what you're saying because you're just in that flight and fright. No empathy there. Very difficult to see perspectives. And then they can't connect their actions, their behaviors, and their thoughts. And I think sometimes we forget that. So when we're moving them into another location and they're at peak, asking them, do you want to do this? If you do this, then you're going to have to go back and do this. Like, that's not the time to be setting limits and making choices. They can't do it. You're up at like the highest point of the kite. And to me, when you're up there, you're really in survival mode as a team. You're focused on safety. You're focused on getting the student away from other students so that nobody else is hurt. And then you're moving into your risk and safety plan. So I just want to remind our teams that when you're moving up, that's why you need a team, is so that if you get into a conversation, a power struggle, you've got your team member saying, remember, we're at lid flip. So like, you need to stop talking because they're not hearing you. Here's the do's and don'ts that I just made this list from what I've seen as I'm helping schools out. Like on the do side, and it sounds so easy, but it's hard, is to remain calm. A lot of times when students are going up on the kite, we sometimes go up with them, which is why you need somebody beside you to say, let me tap in and you tap out. So remain calm. Don't get in a power struggle with the student. Initiate your kite team and don't be alone. Because once you're alone, you don't even have any other people to bounce ideas off. You are in it thick. You're trying to figure out how to de-escalate the situation, how to make sure you're safe, how to make sure the kid's safe. It's too much. You've got to have somebody else with you alongside to help with that. Speak slowly, not a lot of talking. Don't engage in large conversations. Don't ask questions. Don't look for apologies. Follow your plan and make sure you've got that clearly laid out, your risk and safety plan. And then I said, don't wing it. Every once in a while, though, you have a student that just pops off and you're like, we didn't have any plan for them. And then you know what it feels like when you have to be winging it. It does not feel good at all. You just feel like you're right in the thick of it. These are the things that I also wanted to lay out for you guys, is what are those roles for the kite team and the risk and safety? Like, what are they? So if I have my kite team, I'm in West Glen, yes, we've got kite teams, and now we even want to go a little bit deeper. So who does what? So I see in every kite team, you have a primary EA, you got a secondary EA, and then you have a support person. That might be the admin, it might be an LST, and on the edge of that is the teacher, because remember, the teacher is the one that initiates the kite. So the teacher makes the determination of, am I staying with this student and the EA is going in the classroom, or am I in the classroom and the EA is going out with the student? If you're the primary EA, you are the one that determines the location. So are you staying in the class or you're moving from the class? You're the lead communicator. So you're making sure that you're initiating your second person. You're the person that's determining how you're going to get to the location. You follow the emotion of the student, determining needs. I need a granola bar. We need some water. I need that little purple dinosaur that kid likes. I need some sensory things. I need help, right? You're the key interaction for the student, and you indicate when more support is required. So when the secondary EA has to get you more. If you're the secondary EA, you're alongside the primary and you're assisting, removing any objects, you're supporting and transporting the student if needed, you're communicating with the other team members. So the secondary person is letting the teacher know how things are going, is in touch with the administration when it's needed. You're watching the interaction and watching for the second kite, which means you're watching to see if the primary EA is moving up her own kite or his own kite, or if they're getting exhausted, or they're not in their supportive stance anymore, or they're getting maybe in a place where they could get harmed. So the other EA is watching the situation and making sure that the primary EA is safe and ready to engage as necessary. I call it the tag in, tap out. Like, I'm going in and you're going out, and we'll get further support as required. The administrator or the LST, the support person, is the one that relieves not the secondary EA, but the primary EA if necessary, and supports with further escalation. And then they also determine when further supports are needed, as in we need to call the ambulance, we need to call RCMP, what other like higher level things that are needed to de-escalate the situation. So I'm going to stop there for a second because that's a new slide that I've never really shown anybody before, and ask if there's any questions around these roles or where I'm going with the KITE team. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. Feel like you guys are all with me. Mary, I might be like just, they might all be gone. I may be talking to myself, Mary.
Maybe I should ask a question.
Yes, this is definitely part of my SO certification training, but it's from the EA perspective. So now the EAs are learning about, okay, if I'm the primary EA, what do I do and how do I do that? Like, how do I make sure that I've got strategies when I'm at peak that are going to diffuse the situation? What are those strategies? And if I'm the secondary, what am I looking for? Like, what do you mean supportive stance? And what kinds of things should I be watching for that I can support my primary EA? So yes, this whole piece around the KITE and the KITE teams is a big part of our SO certification, is helping our EAs with strategies all throughout the KITE, but definitely this part, Dana. Okay, so I just want to go through about creating a team response. So we've got our, what we call our EA allocation model. And I want you guys to, some of you have already done the mind shift, and some of you better get ready for a mind shift. And so here is the problem that we have been trying to solve in student services. Over on the left-hand side, you've got EA, look at, she's happy, and you've got a severe behavior kid. At this point, he's happy as well. That usually doesn't stay for the whole day. And what happens is you end up getting more and more of these severe behavior kids, and then you don't have enough EAs to attach an EA to each one of them. So you're like, I need now 4 EAs and I only have 2. So what do I do with that? And trying to cluster kids around these kids is difficult. And so we realized that that model, while we were trying to support our kids, was actually, I think, counterproductive, because what was happening was our staff was getting hurt in that model. And so we made a switch to working in teams in order to support our kids, and we've seen this difference that I shared in an earlier presentation. And when I shared this with our superintendents in August, they're like, why would we ever go back to one-to-one? And it's a really good question. You know, when people come to me and ask about a one-to-one, there would be some very specialized situations where I would say we need to do that. But if that's the model that's running through the school, you're never going to have the support you need for all of your kids. And I guarantee your staff, OHS reports are looking something like this if you've got some explosive kids down in school B. So it is a really good question to ask yourself, is the supports I have, am I using them effectively, and am I using them in the right way? So here's the mind shift, is going from the one-to-one model, which looks like support for our severe behavior kids, clustering our other kids around the severe behavior kid, and putting the severe behavior kid as the top priority. So when we used to do our EA allocation, what we would ask is for our schools to give us the data on all of their kids. And then at the end, we would go up on the board, and I remember writing, needs to have an adult at all times for safety. That was the criteria we had. And so Alan and West Glen would say, listen, I need like 15 EAs, and 7 of them need to be one-to-one, and 8 of them I need for my mild moderate. And we come back and say, yeah, thanks, Alan. Here's what you got. Yep, 4 to cover everything. And we never had enough. So it was like so disturbing. We would ask you guys to do all the work. Kylie remembers it, collecting all the data. She'd spend time on it. And then we would come back and say, thanks, Kylie. Thanks for all that work you did. And we're giving you 4. She's like, then why did you ask for all of that if you were just going to give me 4? And it didn't feel good. And there was always another ask on top of it, right? We always needed more. We just couldn't have enough support for what we were dealing with. So the shift is, and it's a big one, is organizing your EAs in teams that are guided by students rather than a schedule of classes, and that your severe emotional behavior needs are not your priority. They're part of your response as a KITE team. So you're building a response and you're building capacity, and you're like, what? Marcy, I don't know how this is going to work. So here's how you're thinking differently about it. So you are putting your EAs, your focus on your lower cognitive, your other students, your mild moderate students, because those students, when something happens in the classroom, you can leave those students safely and go and deal with the student that is escalating. So rather than having Jackie, my EA, hang around by Amy all day, just waiting for Amy to go off, I'm around Amy, I'm waiting, and I could be helping my modified kids, but no, I'm with Amy and I'm following Amy around just in case something happens with Amy. And I guess what we found in our own evidence and research is Amy will go off more if Jackie is around her all day for a variety of reasons. Either because Amy's like, I guess I need to be doing that. That's why I've got Jackie following me around all day. Or I need attention and Jackie's right there and I'm going to do that. And so she becomes my regulation, so I don't learn how to regulate myself. Or unfortunately, sometimes Jackie is the trigger. Right? And so it's like, and now Amy's going off because now today, for some reason, I don't like Jackie anymore. I liked her yesterday, but I don't like her today. So the mind shift is think about your other students and plan your teams around them, and then make your KITE teams around your social emotional. That's the mind shift my team and I had to make too, is move away from putting these students at the forefront and put our other kids first, and then make the support for the team around those kids. So I'm going to give you some examples of what that looks like. So you're like, how does this little team thing work? Like, what are we talking about? So here I am in a school, Purdue school. I've got my social emotional kids. I got Ray Hoppins and Kurt Satcher. Okay, and then I've got some lower cognitive kids. I got John Henry, Joe Harvey, and Lisa Carlson. So these are all my lower cognitive kids. On the social emotional side, I have Coralie is Ray Hoppins' primary EA, and Adrian is Kurt's primary EA. Now in my class, Coralie is looking after most of my lower cognitive kids, and Adrian is doing my communication kids. But when Ray starts to go up the KITE, I'm calling Coralie. If Kurt starts to go up, I'm calling Adrian. And underneath, I'm like, well, who's my KITE team? I've got myself as my teacher. I'm the teacher. And then underneath that, I have 2 EAs. I have an LST that I can also bring in, and I have my administration. So here are the scenarios that I see happening. The first one happens all day, every day, which is the teacher de-escalates the situation. And I call it like back and forth between calm and agitation. You can see those 2 arrows. Ray's going up. Marcy as the teacher is like, okay, Ray, like that looks like that's too hard for you. Let's work on these instead. And I bring him back down. Kurt's going up. He's lost his favorite pencil case. Here you go. I found it. He's coming back down. So you've got teachers that are de-escalating. And that's happening throughout the day. And I'm not calling anybody. My EAs instead in the background, while I'm dealing with them, are working on my tier 2 academic kids. So they're working on either my modified kids, or maybe they're doing some literacy for me or some numeracy, because Ray and Kurt are able to function well in the classroom. Now here we go. Ray's having a bad day. So I'm trying my magic and it's not working, and Ray is now going up the KITE. So in this case, we use WhatsApp, but I mean, you could just use a text, or you could use any communication system. The key is that I have to have some way as a teacher to bring Coralie into the loop and let her know that Ray is peaking and where I am. So you can see I've got RH, Ray Hoppins, peak, he's at peak, moving up there, and I'm in the gym. So Coralie knows she's working with maybe one of my little modified kids, plops the kid back in the classroom and comes to the gym to help me. And now I've got a choice, right? I can either have Coralie de-escalate the situation or I do. So it might be, Coralie, can you go in the gym while I take care of Ray? Or I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're going to go all the way up to peak. So Coralie, I need you to take Ray out in the hall and see what you can do. So Coralie's out, takes Ray out, and gives him a preferred activity and manages to get him back to calm. So you can see here that Coralie then goes, Ray Hoppins, calm. So the teacher knows that. So I got that. I'm like, look at that magical Coralie. She did it. And Adrian, who's the secondary EA, knows, oh, okay, I don't need to go, because I was on standby. I was waiting to see if Coralie needed me to come. In this case, we're good, and I can go back and work with the students that I was with. Let's say we're moving to peak and Coralie can't diffuse the situation. So it starts again. I'm the teacher, and I say Ray Hoppins is peaking and where it is. I'm in the gym. Now Coralie tries to redirect, but she can't, and it's escalating more. So she now says RH peak gym. So now Adrian knows I've got to come. Right? It's all about who sends the text. And it doesn't have to be anything, like I said, complicated. You come up with your own way of doing it. But you just need to have a way to let your EAs know where they need to be. So now Adrian comes, they're together, they're following the RAS plan, and they've managed to get Ray back to calm. Now think on the background. The administrator is going, whoa, okay, it looks like Ray Hoppins is peaking. Okay, Coralie has called Adrian. Okay, am I needed? No, they've got him back to calm. Okay, it's all good. So your team is all in the loop. Now, or it could be this, which is I send out the Ray Hoppins peak in the gym. Coralie comes, attempts to redirect, but it doesn't happen. And then I ask Coralie to stay and I go. And so now the teacher is in and I bring Adrian in if I need that. It could work either way. It's either the EA comes in or the teacher does that. Now, what happens if you get up to the peak, Adrian's there, and you still can't diffuse the situation? So you've got your two primary EAs up there and you need more help. That's this one. I'm at peak and I need some help. So now Adrian's there. RH peak in the gym, and Adrian sends out the help, right? Because she's the secondary. So Adrian says, RH help gym. And so in this case, the LST comes and she is working with that. If she needs more help, then she sends out something that says she needs the admin, and then they bring it back down to calm. Now, what I want to just pause on this slide because I want to really walk through something that's important here. If you have one person that is running this whole show, one EA, where are their supports? Like, look how many supports me as the teacher and the primary EA has. So as a teacher, I have Coralie, I have Adrian, I have my LST when needed, and I even have my administration if I need that. If I'm the primary EA, Coralie, I know I've got a second, and you know what it's like when you're at peak. I know you guys have all been there by yourself. It just feels like time stands still. And you're like trying every trick in the book, and you can't think of anything else. And you're in this room with this very escalated student, and it feels awful. So like having somebody else there is huge for documenting when you need that, if something happens, for giving you support when you need that, for tagging out when you need that. So I put this slide here to remind you, these kids need a team. We've all been to the case conferences, you know, where it's like Marcy comes in, the psychologist comes in, the OT's in, the SLP's in, the mental health therapist is in, the parent advocate's in, and we all sit and talk about what our plans are for the student. We've got all of these people around the table, and then we leave and we say, and now the EA runs the whole show. It's just, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's a fair ask. So I love this model that provides more support for everybody. Plus, if you're the lady in pink, Dana Schaefer, let's say it's Dana. Like anytime there's a peak, Dana's running. She's the vice principal of Innisfil Middle, and every EA has her on speed dial. They're texting. So they get up to peak and they don't have a team. Their team is Dana. So what happens when Dana runs over to help Marcy's situation, and then there's another EA that needs help, and there's another EA that needs help, like we can't clone, though we'd love to, Dana. So you end up with this one person that is trying to respond to all of these needs, and that doesn't feel good, and it's not effective either. So I put down some Marcy, oh my goodness scenarios. Like, what do you do with these? Here's the first one, double trouble. And this is Ray Hoppins, because you guys know this happens. Ray Hoppins is escalating, and while he's escalating, Kurt's escalating. So it's like, okay, I'm the teacher, and both of them are going off at the same time. What do I do with that? What do I do with that situation? So it looks like this. Start with Ray. Ray Hoppins peak in the gym. Coralie's coming. As Coralie's on her way, she's like, Ray Hoppins is peaking in the gym, Adrian. So Adrian's on her way to help Coralie. And then here I come. Kurt Satcher is also peaking in the gym. And Adrian goes, okay, so I need Kirsten, my LST. I need help in the gym. And then Kirsten says, I need the admin to come and help. So what happens is that Coralie and probably the LST support Ray, and Adrian and the administration support Kurt. So you've got this plan where you have, more team support when needed when you have double trouble. Or here's my other, oh my goodness scenario, which is what if one of these EAs, God forbid, is sick? So it's like Adrian, she's out. And now we have Sean, a brand new EA coming in. Well, I think for most of the time, you guys would take Sean out of this and put in another EA that kind of understands the situation. But let's say you can't do that. It's COVID times and it's not looking good. You don't have another EA to put in and Sean is in. This is how I saw that going down, which is Kurt is escalating. And so I would, as the teacher, send out the text because Sean isn't going to know all of the communication. So I'm like, Sean, I'm just going to let the other team know that Kurt is escalating and we're in the gym. And then in that case, as the teacher, I would go with Coralie or Kirsten and help. And I would have Sean, who's the sub EA, stay in my classroom. So I would be the one that would go out. Okay, before we move from that, any other scenarios you can think of or any questions around the teams? I can see in this meeting, we have many people who are using these teams and doing them really well. So I'd love to know if you have any feedback or if you're doing anything different that you want to share. So I'll stop talking for a second. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I just have a question. I have a student who's not sort of on our EA radar. So he has a kite plan that we're putting in place. So I don't have any EAs that have a connection with him, but he's in several classes. He's at grade level, all of those things. It's just a social emotional moment for him. So how would you go about, yeah, I guess because part of that is going to be relational, right, for an EA. So what would be the steps for a kid that's not on our radar with an EA already in the classroom?
I would always, Jackie, I think for any of these, like Coralie, Adrian, that is Ray and Kurt's EA, like these are pretty vulnerable times when they get up to peak. Mm-hmm. They've got to have a relationship with these kids or else it's a gong show. So at the beginning, I usually say to schools, have some time when Coralie and Ray are interacting together. So because you'd be surprised how much time you have that you can move your EAs around when they're not tied to one student all day. Where, I'm running some literacy work and I'm just going to ask Coralie on Wednesdays, instead, can you go and support Ray with his math, just so he knows who you are and build that relationship. And that's what I would suggest for that student that you're talking about is carve out some time, not when he's at peak, just to say like, this is your support person.
Right.
Them to do some things. And it's like, this is your person. Yeah. That's your guy or that's your gal, right? And so they're just going to be working with you and they'll be there for you if you ever need them at a higher level of support. So they're like, okay, like that's my safety person. And so they know who that is when they come in and they're at peak. They've got to know those people. You're so right.
Mhm.
They've got to have a really good relationship with those people at peak, or else that doesn't go well at all, right? Then they're looking for you because you do have a relationship with them. And they're so vulnerable up there. Like that's where like dignity is at their lowest, right? They're yelling things that they don't mean. Sometimes they hit and kick and hurt you and they don't mean that either. So like it's a pretty tough time, I think, when you're up there to not be with somebody who you feel you've got high trust with.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Jackie. Other questions? How'd you like that wait time? Look at that wait time, you guys, right? Okay, so the other piece of this is something we call SOAR. And this is always hard to find the time to do this. We have it as 20 minutes here, I think, 25 minutes. I've done this process in 5 minutes. So I've been like, okay, we're back down in calm, and I grab the EA and I grab the administrator and say, let's quickly, like what happened? What are the new triggers? What started this whole thing off? Write it down. What did you do when you got up to peak that finally de-escalated the situation? Write it down. And then make sure that you reconnect. And I'll never forget the first time I showed this slide to EAs. They said, right, reconnect and make sure that the student's okay. And I'm like, no. Reconnect and make sure you're okay. And they're like, us? Oh, like we're fine. And I'm like, no, it's important. Like, are you okay? Do you need a break? If you've been up at peak and working in a really serious, complex situation, sometimes our EAs need a break. They're like, I just need a moment to like reflect on that process, it breathe, and unfortunately sometimes and get some first aid if it's that difficult. So this is important. I wouldn't leave this. If you've had a peak situation and you haven't debriefed what happened with that, guaranteed you're probably going to end up in the same situation again because you're not addressing the trigger and you don't know what you did to diffuse the situation. So like Coralie, worked her magic, and she's like, I got that back down again. And Adrian would say, well, what did you do? I did this. I went and got that darn purple dinosaur and just put it in the room with him, and he was fine. Okay, that's good to know. That's what we need. Or I gave him some water, or he needs a snack. I put some food in there for him, and that calmed him down. So this part, even though this is always the part where like we don't have time, we've got to find a little bit of time to just check with everybody to see what happened, what started it, what we learned from it, and to make sure everybody's okay. So if you're actually building these kites, here's the process. And always, I think having the coordinators or myself along for this is really important because it's a new way of thinking about your EAs. So anytime you're thinking, yeah, I think I would like to rejig and reshuffle some of our resources, but I don't understand the process. So I'll walk you through it, but I'm more than happy to sit down with you and your team and do this, and so are the coordinators. So here's what it looks like. You start by identifying the needs that are in your building. So you're not looking at your social emotional needs. You're looking at what are the other needs that you have for the students in HJ Cody, in West Glen, in Deer Meadow. What are the other ones? Well, we've got quite a few lower cognitive kids, so modified kids. Okay, let's put those up. If you're an OES, for whatever reason, you always have communication kids, right? So anywhere in Olds, there seems to be this like piece where we have nonverbal kids. I don't know what's happening in Olds, but you might have communication kids. You might have academics where you're like, they need help with reading, math, like just general academics. Social language, we got bullying. They don't know how to, be with each other and be appropriate with kids. I might need that. So I put the self-check because whenever I start this process, people always want to give me all of their coded kids. And I'm like, nah, that's not what I want. I just want you to think about if I was not in the frame of mind of moving forward, who would be the kids that I would say is a one-to-one? A one-to-one cognitive kid, a one-to-one communication kid, a really severe LD kid. Social language, like I'm suspending this kid every other day. Those are the ones that you're putting up here. Not all of your inclusive ed supports. It's your most severe. So you're top of the triangle. And once you have those, then you start to organize them by areas. So for example, in this case, I've got Kyle, who's in, like, that's the grade 3. Abe's in grade 2, Peter's in grade 1, and Jackson's in grade 2. I could have picked a high school one very easily as well. But you'll have some students who are in one area and some that are in 2 and some that are in all 3. So Jackson, lower cognitive and communication. Peter, lower cognitive. Abe, communication. Kyle, academics, but he would really just be in a targeted group. And again, notice nowhere in here do I have my SEL kids. So I do that for the lower cognitive. I do that for my communication kids and any other areas that I determine in the school. And then it's all about triangles, folks, because then after that, I build my triangles. So in my cognitive piece, those are my most severe kids. So I got Jackson, who has multiple areas, Peter, who's severe, and Abe, who's severe. Kyle, who I feel I could put in a group. In communication, Larry's in a couple of areas, Ariel's in a couple of areas, Gary and Rod, severe. And then I asked the school, now give me your social emotional kids. So the red are the high flyers. The orange are the ones that will pop off every once in a while, but it's not daily. And those green ones are, we need some check-ins. Like, we've seen it happen. Like, Skip's gone off sometimes and we're like, whoa, when he goes, he really goes. But it's not every day. It's not even weekly. It might be once a month. So you've got those kids. I'm like, okay. So once you have that, then this is the process that I work through with the schools. I start to ask them to create their teams. So I'm like, how many EAs have you got? I'm like, we have 6 that we're making for these teams. Okay, so we've got Kite Team 1, Jody and Jane. Kite Team 2, April and Dawn. And Kite Team 3, Sarah and Candy. And notice how I've highlighted them. Jody and Jane are looking after Jackson, Peter, Abe, and Kyle, right? Then you've got April and Dawn that are looking after the communication kids. Sarah and Candy are looking after and checking in on all of these little universal, Skip, Mike, Kate, Lou, and Craig. There's a couple where I might go, they're so severe and complex. They need to be with the EA for the majority of the time, and then they can go over and support the SEL kids. So like Jackson, Larry, and Ariella, they have like a main EA that's working with them. They're still part of the team. So like Kipper, the EA, is still part of Kite 1. Leona and Chris are still part of Kite 2. Sarah and Candy are Kite 3. So here's what it looks like. Now I'm like, okay, so let's start putting in some of our social emotional kids in there. So now you're going to start adding your kids underneath. So watch what happens. Jody and Jane, you're looking after Peter, Abe, and Kyle during the week, but you've got Aaron, Jane as the primary. Sorry, Jody, and Caleb has Jane. That's their Kite team. Aaron goes off, the teacher calls, Jody's coming. Caleb goes off, the teacher lets them know Jane's coming. Jody's support is Jane, Jane's support is Jody. You following it? Now I'm going over and I've got Lyle and Liam. So Lyle has April as his primary and Liam has Dawn. And those two are working as a Kite team. And then you've got Zach and Andy. So you got Sarah looking after Zach. You've got Candy looking after Andy. And those are their most severe kids. Because remember, Sarah and Candy really are just doing some check-ins for those universal social emotional kids. The heavy lifting is probably with Zach and Andy. And then underneath that, we're like, we wouldn't mind if you could also make a relationship with Skip and Kate and Lou and Craig and Mike. So you've got some other universals when needed. That's their Kite teams. If they go off, then they know Jody and Jane are taking care of Skip and Kate. April and Dawn are looking after Lou and Craig. And Sarah and Candy are looking after Mike. And then the rest of the time, they're focusing on those other kids. So April and Dawn working away, helping Larry, helping Gary, helping Rod, and then all of a sudden Lyle is having a situation. It's easier to move a communication kid back in the classroom than it is to move a social emotional kid out of a classroom, if that makes sense. So that's why we'd say focus on those kids and then bring the ones out when you need to. So this is being responsive rather than reactive. Going to stop there, see if you have any questions with that slide, because that, if you're not following along, it looks crazy. Like every time I show this to other divisions, they're like, whoa, what is this? But once you get in it, you really understand it. So if you think about your own schools, think about who would be your kids you would put under the cognitive area. Who might be the kids that are either communication or social language or your academics? And then who are your social emotional kids? And start thinking about how you can build teams that support your other kids and then can respond to the needs of your social emotional kids. So I'm going to give you some examples from other schools so you have them. So this is an elementary, no, this is a middle school. So in the middle school, they've got cognitive, and then they said, no, we actually also have academic supports. Like we've got some students that are really struggling with academics. We don't have those communication kids. And then we really have this whole little section of social language kids that also need support. And so they built their teams, Kite 1, Kite 2, Kite 3. And you can see underneath that, they started to put their students that they would support and who their social emotional kids are. So you've got Alexis, who's like, okay, that's Dee and Carol together. So Carol's with Alexis. If she needs help, she calls Dee, right? Michael's got Rochelle, but if Rochelle needs help, she calls Rhonda. And it goes back and forth in that way, right? So you've got different supports that you have for each of your areas. So there's an example of one school. I think, and I don't know if this school still does this, but they were pretty forward thinking. And instead of putting their EAs in classrooms, they actually started to develop their timetables around the students, which I think makes really good sense, which is like, Dee and Carol, here are your kids. You've got Zach, Alexis, Ben, Jacob, Christina, Tegan, Xander, Jaden, and Alexis. We expect you to look after these kids during the week and go in and support them. And so that your timetable is your kids rather than being tied to a classroom. I really love that. And I think they really supported and inspired this school to do the very same thing. So this is a much larger high school. And so you can see they've got their Kite teams. They have their EAs set up. They've organized their social emotional kids. And then underneath that, they're like, okay, Kathy, Laura, and Aria, here are the academic kids we expect you to be looking in on. But if Yanish or Daniel go off, you go and support them. So they made their kind of list of academic kids, much like that other school. They followed that. They really loved that model. And then they built this Kite team out of that. So those are some examples of how schools have created the Kite teams. It kind of has to be, you're all in. Because if you're just making a Kite team for one kid and then you're running one-to-one everywhere else, it doesn't really work. You've kind of got to go all in and start manipulating it. I'm going to go back. Actually, I'm going to keep it on here and see if you have any questions around building the actual teams themselves. I'd love to actually even hear if you guys think this could work in your school. So like, don't be too quiet. I might call out on people if you are, but give me some examples of either we're doing this and this is how we're running it. Like Kylie, I think West Glen does this. So I'd love to hear how that's going. And for those of you who haven't started it, what are your thoughts around that? So Kylie, do you mind if I pick on you? Because West Glen I think, does this very, very well. So I think you're one of those model schools for it.
Yeah, that first one was ours from a couple of years ago. I know the grade 6s are in grade 8 this year. It worked really well. We take a collaborative approach to a lot of things, but it was great to be able to call in a second person, or when an EA is ill, we always just have someone fill in. So there's always someone, a second to call in. And often just even having that opportunity for that EA to take the class, or the second EA to take the class, so then the teacher can step back in to help, was definitely beneficial.
Yeah, like your school is one of those schools that has very low OHS reports, right? Like Carolyn before was the lady in pink for sure. Like Carolyn was running. She was running all day. She was the responder.
He still does run, but
Yeah.
there's,
I mean,
we
it's so much
do have a
better.
team approach for sure.
You guys still do that where you put up your students and then your EA's timetable is based around the students?
Part of it is when we do our, I see Carolyn has her hand up, maybe she wants to add to this, but I know when we do our class, make our classes as well, we take a look at what we're going to need, and each grade as well, what they're going to need.
Oh, that's awesome. Alex, I see you got your hand up. Thank you, Kylie. Thank you for letting me pick on you.
I'm just curious in terms of like, I guess our high school context at HJ Cody, like we have 9 students that are one-to-one, and we basically have nine EAs. So I just am wondering the logistics of what this looks like, right, for our kids who are maybe kids who need kite plans, kids who are social emotional, kids who just need that academic support in terms of the mild moderates. How do we make that work when we only have 9 EAs that are one-to-one already with our life skills kids? Just wondering about the logistics of that.
So part of that is reinventing and thinking about the one-to-one. Do they need to be one-to-one, or is there a way that you can cluster them so that you have your life skills together with 2 or 3 A's and then you freed up some other ones? This plan that's up, Alex, is actually HJ Cody. So when you think about how many kids they've got, they like really parceled it out. They're like, the language of one-to-one doesn't exist there anymore. It's like, who's in what kite team? Like, so who's in the team? Because you're one-to-one, if you say life skills, some of those students don't need somebody by them the whole day, that they can leave and go and support a social emotional kid. You just got to come up with a profile around what that would look like. So like Jackie might be able to, because she knows those kids so well, she might be able to look and go, okay, I know which students are both, which is they're a lower cognitive life skills kid, and they're also a social emotional kid that requires that kind of support. And so she might be able to determine when they need that and when they don't. I mean, if we get to grade 12 and we still have students that are one-to-one, I think we might be moving in the wrong direction, because at some point they've got to be independent, right? So it's that idea of how do we start to ebb and move that forward? This in high school is tricky. It really is. I think sitting down like I did with Tanis and Mike the one year, it's like almost looking at it student by student and case by case and deciding what it could look like at HJ Cody. Jackie?
I agree, and we were trying to be creative, but just in our population right now, I would think about, we have a non-verbal student completely unable to communicate and be included in some areas. That's just her profile. Others that are safety hazards, if there's not an EA in the room, it could be a safety hazard because of what option that they're in. And so we do cluster when we can, but primarily there aren't EAs available in our world to go at any given time. Like it would be different because every single block looks different. Every single period looks different. So a kite team that
I would love to get in there and challenge it.
Right?
It's like, let's
no, and that was
like the safety of like having somebody communicate. Yeah. Do you need the same person to be the communication partner for the student throughout the day? Or could it be the peers within the class and the teacher in the class that's the communication partner? Or there's a safety issue, but if there's an adult in the room, can they not also take on some of the safety issues? So it's not always the same EA that's covering the safety issues. But I totally get it, Jackie. I think it is like, it's so unique in each school that you almost have to sit down with a plan and go, what is actually possible and what isn't possible. Yeah, so that's all that we would love, is like same thing. Just have you guys come in and walk me through it, and anyone else. I'd love to do that with you, Jackie. It'd be so fun. Carolyn, what you got? I saw your hand up earlier.
Oh, sorry, I had a phone call and I had to take it down. I was just going to say, and especially like when Alex is asking, how do you manage them all? The one thing that the kite system did for us was that it actually freed up a lot of my time because I was that lady in red. I prefer lady in red, Marcy. Pink's really not my color. And, that before it was just easy, like the EAs came my way every time there was an issue, and I deal with so little behavioral stuff now. It's because they really have the skills and they feel empowered to do it, right? And they're not just, it's way easier with the difficult kids to just tap out and let somebody else go for it. And like Kylie said, we've got our schedule looks like, I think the trains in Europe move with a little less planning than our timetable. Like there's colors and people moving all over, but it sure means the kids that need coverage are covered. We're running with 4 less EAs than we would have had 4 years ago. And it's tight, don't get me wrong. Like, boy, if you wanted to send another one my way, we could sure keep them busy, but we're making it work.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. I think the biggest thing in West Glen, and I do think it is a really good story, is it's just the data, like the data around, like Carolyn, when I look, you guys haven't had an OH&S in quite a while. Like last year, there wasn't even one. So to me, that just shows that we're on the right path. We've just got to make sure that it works in each building. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, Gayleen, I would say true, but I also believe that doesn't mean when you get to high school, it's a one-to-one model again, because the same data, the same evidence, the same research that we found around our impact on our kids is the same in high school as it is in elementary school. So we've got to think of different ways to be a team and not be one-to-one when we go back into high school again, because that's easier for us, or like you said, to be more pragmatic. I do think that there are opportunities where this model could work at the high school and could benefit both our staff and our students. Like I'd be willing to roll my sleeves up and try it out with a couple of high schools. If you'd ever want me around, I'd be willing to invest in it and see what could happen with it. Are there any other questions before I let you go? I don't want you to be late for your next session. I will also share these slides. We'll put them in the drive so you've got the slides, because I know you'll want to look at the planning pieces of that. And anytime, this is one of the things I really love to do. I know it's very geeky, but I still remember sitting down with Alan and Carolyn and going through their kids. And I just love kind of planning it out, mapping it out, and seeing what's possible. So if you ever want me there or one of our coordinators, we love to do this kind of stuff and help you guys out. So let us know. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
Marcy, are we